two levels to the Wiccan understanding of deity. The first is personal, the second is universal. On a personal level, we approach deity as an entity with which we interact through words and actions, and with whom we maintain a personal relationship. At this level, we give deity many names and faces, and interact with deity through these. Most Wiccans will use a variety of names and faces for deity in this personal sense, and will have one particular form which they perceive as their patron. They will interact with this patron deity, or in some cases patron deities, in a very personal way, seeking guidance, inspiration, and practical help in both daily life and esoteric matters. Let us use the goddess Sekhmet as an example. Sekhmet is a goddess of Egyptian provenance, and her worship goes back to and before the dawn of recorded history. Sekhmet is commonly portrayed as a woman with the head of a lioness, carrying either a scepter or a sword. Sekhmet is the patroness of magic, but also of courage and strength. A devotee of Sekhmet might hope to be inspired by her with these qualities. Does this mean that we believe that Sekhmet is an entity living somewhere with the actual head of a lioness on a human woman's body? No. The best analogy of how Wiccans look at deity is the famous example of the diamond. We think of deity rather like an enormous diamond of many facets. Each facet is beautiful in and of itself and can be used as a way to access the heart of the diamond. But in reality, each is only a different way of looking at the same stone. Thus, when the devotee speaks to Sekhmet, they are in reality using a personal form to access a universal power. The reason we need such personal forms is we build our bond with deity through emotion. All of the abstract understanding in the world will make no difference to you if you cannot connect to it emotionally. It will seem dry and empty, striking no resonance in your being. Since everyone's emotional nature is different, being as we are individuals, we Wiccans use many different images of deity. A person who has negative feelings toward their mother may have difficulty identifying with the mother goddess, but may find a crone goddess a great source of strength and comfort. A person who loves the ocean may find it much easier to connect with a more aquatic mother goddesses like Yamaya than with an earthy mother goddess like Gaia. Both are the same concept, but the exact approach offers variety to the individual. At no time do we perceive an individual face of deity, such as Venus or Caradwen or Shakti, as being the only face of deity, only our individually preferred face. Also, it must be remembered that we live many lifetimes through reincarnation. Sometimes we resonate very strongly to a particular face of deity because we have interacted with deity through that face in previous lifetimes. Thus, we might be drawn to Isis, for example, because we have in previous lifetimes been a devotee of Isis. The second way in which Wiccans look at deity is universal. We acknowledge that the true nature of deity is beyond all names and forms, and indeed, perhaps beyond all mortal understanding. As our personal images of deity are the facets, so universal deity is the diamond. Wiccans believe that any one name or form for deity can never possibly encompass all the nature of universal deity, but can only serve to limit our understanding of it. Because of this, we regard monotheism as an extremely primitive and limiting point of view. Rather, we use our personal images of deity symbolically to help us understand the nature of universal deity, using myth as a tool to illustrate the qualities and processes of universal deity, without ever imagining that a single view can encapsulate the whole nature of the divine. Having laid out this basic understanding of how Wiccans view deity, let us illustrate it by presenting one of the most sacred myths of the Wiccan faith and explaining its deeper meaning. One of the most sacred pieces of Wiccan literature is the Vangelo delle Streghe. This is a collection of legends preserved and passed down through generations of the Aradian witches of Italy. A little over a century ago, the Italian witch Maddalena Allenti gave a copy of the Vangelo to the famed folklorist Charles Godfrey Leland, on the understanding that he would publish it. The most important part of the Vangelo is the creation story it contains. This creation story is a sublime allegorical account of the creation of the physical world and the descent of spirit into matter. The story touches on very ancient themes, being reminiscent of the ancient Greek myth of Ophion and Eurynome, and of the creation myth of the goddess Cybele. You must understand, however, that the stories in the Vangelo are meant to be understood as allegory. That is to say, that they represent their subject symbolically, portraying it in familiar everyday forms rather than abstract concepts. If you try to read these stories literally, they appear rather shallow and foolish. Only by understanding that the Vangelo's human characters actually represent the timeless forces of nature and the universe, and their actions portray the cosmic processes, can you hope to get anything out of it. Maddalena did not bother to explain this. She was willing to let people know more about the ancient Aradian witch traditions, but she didn't want them to know much. She knew that people who understood allegory would be able to read between the lines and appreciate what they found there. She is also supposed to have made certain alterations to the text, apparently for purposes of secrecy, which leaves some confusion in the text. But despite this, the text is still of enormous value. According to the Vangelo delle Streghe, Diana was the first created of all creation. In her were all things. In other words, Diana, or goddess, is primeval deity. She existed before the first beginning as chaos, God without form existing in a void, and having within herself the seeds of all things, both spiritual and material, all mixed up together without order or definition. Primeval deity is androgynous, having both feminine, spirit or yin, and masculine, matter or yang elements, and is sometimes portrayed as such in myth and artwork. Sometimes, however, primeval deity is portrayed as feminine, since we think of primeval deity in association with the goddess, or spirit, indeed as the higher self of goddess. In this sense, primeval deity is identified with the crone goddess, the goddess in her aged state, having existed from before the dawn of time. This is the wisest and most knowing part of goddess, most commonly called Hecate. This is the goddess portrayed with greater or lesser respect as the Halloween witch, with her pointed hat and broom. For endless eons, primeval deity existed in this amorphous and undifferentiated state, in the darkness before the first creation. At first she slept, aware of nothing, resting and recharging, gathering her energies and merely being, alone and complete in herself. But over the course of time, primeval deity began to stir, to become aware. First, she became aware of her own existence. In time, she began to think, to dream, to question, to desire. She wondered, what would it be like to feel? What would it be like to move, to take action, to be able to receive sensation, to see, to taste, to hear? And so for eons, primeval deity thought, and considered, and wondered. And then, out of herself, the first darkness, she divided herself. Into darkness and light she was divided. The God, her brother, and her son, herself and her other self, was the light. Primeval deity divided herself. One became two. All of the physical, tangible, volatile parts of primeval deity went into the God who was the light. The God exploded into existence out of primeval deity in a shower of spark and flame, which we remember as the Big Bang, the starting point of physical creation. All of the spiritual, ethereal, eternal parts of primeval deity remained in the goddess. In this sense, goddess is thought of as a continuation of primeval deity, since the consciousness of primeval deity is one of the spiritual parts that remained with her. And the God spread out in all directions through the primordial void, a blaze of light and superheated matter. In time, his fire would cool into stars, and from stars to planets. As this happens, the vibration of the matter slows. It becomes more dense, seemingly solid. This slowing, cooling, and solidifying is described as falling into matter. Symbolically, the God is described as having fallen into 7 planes of existence. Some people say that there are more, but then the divisions are not as exact as all that. So the number is not so important as the concept. 7 planes is the ancient number based on the idea of the 7 Ptolemaic planets, that is, the sun, moon, and those planets visible with the naked eye. These 7 planes are, from the lowest up, physical, emotional, mental, astral, solar or egoic, monadic, and divine. We'll talk more about these later. The 7 planes are also sometimes called the 7 spheres, or the 7 dimensions. All refer to the same basic concept. The Vangelo continues, "And when Diana saw that the light was so beautiful, the light which was her other half, her brother the god, she yearned for it with exceeding great desire. Wishing to receive the light again into her darkness, to swallow it up in rapture, in delight. She trembled with desire, and this trembling was the first dawn. But the god's light fled from her, and he would not yield to her wishes. He was the light which flies into the most distant parts of heaven, the mouse which flies before the cat. Seeing the beauty of the god, that is, of the physical universe, the goddess was entranced with desire, and wanted it back. She had dreamed of seeing and tasting and doing, but being separate from the god, she could do none of this. She could only observe from outside that which she had created. The goddess wanted the experiences she had dreamed of, and so she desired to take the created universe back into herself. But it wasn't that easy. The Vangelo tells how the goddess went to the oldest part of herself, primeval deity, who was still within her. The Vangelo calls primeval deity the mothers and fathers who were before the first creation, emphasizing primeval deity's androgynous aspect. In other words, the goddess consulted her own higher self. In many ancient myths, notably the story of Demeter and Persephone, this same process is shown as the goddess entering Hecate's cave to take counsel of the eldest and wisest part of deity. In the Vangelo, Diana asked primeval deity how she could reunite with the god. How could spirit take matter back into itself? And the ancient one, primeval deity, the goddess' own higher self, answered in this way. To rise, you must fall. To become the greatest of all goddesses, you must first become a mortal. In other words, it was not possible for spirit simply to take matter back into herself. If the goddess wished to reunite with the god, to be one with matter and experience it, she had to enter into the physical world. Only in that way could goddess and god reunite. And so Diana fell. That is to say, she descended through the 7 planes to the physical. She did this by dividing off parts of herself, the many souls, which she sent into the physical, placing them into physical forms. Each soul was to lead many lifetimes, going through many physical forms in the process. Seeing this now, you are one of the lifetimes of one of those souls, which are part of the great goddess. We are her children, and also children of the god, for our existence is the accomplishment of their union. The Vangelo describes this process in extremely symbolic terms. It tells how Diana took the form of a cat, the soul entering into material form, and in this way got close to the god, then resuming her own form, made passionate love with him. And then, to maintain the union of spirit and matter, the goddess cast a spell. She sang a charm, and her voice was as the buzzing of bees. And then Diana sat at her spinning wheel and began to spin the thread of life. And the god turned the wheel. In other words, having placed soul into matter, the goddess used the power of sound, that is vibration, to set the universe as we know it into motion. Energy is what holds all things together, from subatomic particles to the very galaxies of stars. The vibration of that energy, its movement, sometimes described as frequency, is what makes it work and determines on what level it works. The denser or more physical a thing is, the lower its vibration or frequency is said to be. The more spiritual the energy, the higher its vibration is said to be. Vibration is comparable to sound, which can be a powerful magical tool. For this reason, the vibration of the universe, at differing frequencies through each of the 7 planes or spheres, is often described as the music of the spheres. Music and song have long been used in many spiritual traditions as a means of affecting the vibration of energy. Sound can be used in this way to disperse negative or unfocused energy, to break down psychic blockages, and to create or affect specific energetic forms. Sound is a very powerful tool precisely because sound, or vibration, is the very force the goddess used to set the wheel of life into motion. Called the goddess spinning wheel in the Vangelo delle Streghe, the wheel of life is a very ancient concept. It is represented annually in the sacred wheel of the year, which you will learn about in Lesson 3. From this wheel, the goddess, spirit, spins the thread of life. It determines its nature, qualities, the lessons to be learned, and the things to be done and accomplished. The destiny, if you would. But the god, matter, or perhaps more precisely physical experience, turns the wheel. As goddess is the nature of life, the god is the process of living, the movement through the planes of existence. The goddess is the essential nature of the universe and life itself. She provides the divine spark which animates all things, but the god carries that spark forward. The god is Lord of space and time, master of the temporal universe. In this aspect he is called the Lord of the Dance, for he leads the dance of life, facilitating experience and growth. In this way, their essence originating from the goddess, their ability to move and to grow originating from the god, the many souls descended to the physical plane. The goal of this, as stated above, was to experience, to learn and grow. Having arrived in the physical, the souls set out to learn all that the physical plane could teach them, and then began their ascent back up through the 7 planes, to ultimately rejoin with goddess from whence they come. Each plane has its own special lessons, which are of great importance to the soul. Though seemingly separated from the goddess, each of these souls remains always attached to her, always part of her, for it is through them, as part of them, that goddess entered into her own physical creation, the god. We are one with the goddess, and our experiences are her experience. We are eternal and immortal as souls, never cut off from goddess or spirit, only differentiated. All of the powers and abilities of goddess are within us, and at our command, if we can clear our vision enough, to see and access them. Descending through the planes of existence was like going through a curtain or veil. The veil obscures our vision of the things above us. Because of the veil, we forget that we are part of goddess, that we are spiritual beings experiencing the physical, and start to think that we are simply physical beings. As we ascend the planes, we are highly aware of those planes which are below us, and perceive them fairly easily. It is much harder to perceive the planes above us. It is hard for us to see or communicate with the higher planes of consciousness, and easy to imagine that what our eyes perceive is all that exists. To progress, we must part the veil and see beyond it. The more we work magically and psychically, the thinner that veil becomes. Some people are born with the veil already very thin. These people are said to be born old. It may seem that those who are born old don't have to work as hard to progress, that psychic and magical skills just come naturally to them. This is because they've already done the work to develop these skills in previous lifetimes. It is generally said that we are currently on the mental plane, able to easily perceive mental, emotional, and physical energies, and that we are, and have long been, in the process of moving into the intuitional or astral plane, and thus have increasing perception of what we might loosely call psychic matters. Though we have some perception of the planes beyond this, it is difficult to see very much of them from our current position. Of course, as in all things, there are a variety of points of view on the subject of the planes or spheres of existence. This is the Correllian view. As you can see, Wicca perceives the conscious mind as only a small part of a much larger being, originating from and eternally connected to the Mother Goddess. Our conscious self is normally a reflection of our physical body, first dimension, our emotions, second dimension, and our thinking mind, third dimension. These 3 dimensions of our being are said to compose our lower self. It should be understood that the term lower refers to vibrational frequency and not to any sort of value judgment, as all parts of the being are good and valuable. The lower the vibrational frequency, the greater the physical density. As humans, we normally have a natural comprehension of these 3 aspects of our lower self, accepting them without question as an obvious component of our being. We all know our physical body and its reactions. We all feel our emotions, conscious and subconscious. We're all aware of our cognitive and rational faculties. All of these are within our level of common experience and are known to us, if not always fully understood. Above our level of common experience is our higher self, a concept you were introduced to in Lesson 1. The higher self, like the lower self, has 3 levels of being. Immediately above our common perception is the astral self, 4th dimension. Also called the causal self, the astral self is the part of us which determines what things we choose to experience in a given physical life, and what lessons we are trying to learn. It is from this level that the higher self creates the life that we are living. The astral portion of the higher self sets the pattern of life, accepts or rejects every potential event in it, and can make whatever alterations the higher self chooses at any point during the life. This is one reason it is so important to be on good terms with our higher self, because by moving in sync with its choices, we make life a much easier process. The astral level, also sometimes called the intuitional or Buddhic level, is a level that we shift to when we work magic. Above the astral is the egoic self, or soul, 5th dimension. The word soul is often used to describe the whole higher self, but specifically refers to the 5th level of the being. The soul is the separate personality of the higher self, built up of the total experience of many, many lifetimes. All of the benefits of every life lived, the outcome of all lessons learned, the knowledge of all things seen, felt, and done is retained in the soul, and gives it its special character which is distinct from all other souls. The soul is the organ by which the being grows, the manner in which experience and growth is retained and built upon. Above the soul is the monad. The term monad comes from the Greek monas, meaning single unit. The monad is the portion of the soul which is perfect in itself, just as it was when the goddess divided it off from herself. The monad is the divine spark of life which animates the being, and which is conscious of itself as a portion of deity. The monad is a separate portion of the goddess, but is essentially the same intelligence with no differentiation. The monad is individuated, but not differentiated from the goddess, and contains all of the attributes and qualities of the divine, while at the same time being separate unto itself. The monad is the motivating force of the being. Because of this, the monad moves always to the good, and is incapable of doing otherwise. The monad is a perfect microcosm of goddess, and remembers the time before the first creation when all was one. The monad also remembers the reason that it was separated off from the goddess, and because of this, has a natural desire to evolve and unfold, until it is one with the goddess again. These 3 parts form the higher self, of which we only become aware through effort. The astral self, which creates our life as we live it, deciding and arranging all that happens. The soul, which stores all of these experiences and is shaped by them. And the monad, the divine part of us, which sought those experiences and revels in them, but which also seeks eventual union with the rest of deity and a return to the primordial oneness. The final level of being, above the monad, is the goddess herself, 7th dimension. She is the single soul of the universe from whom all others ultimately come, and she is the very center of your being. All of creation branches off from her through the medium of the God. Goddess is the life. God is the living. Goddess is the essence. God is the manifestation. Every aspect of creation is endowed by both goddess and God, and all is sentient in the higher levels of its being, if not always in the physical. Now, as we said in Lesson 1, the universe is composed of energy. All these different parts of the being are composed of energy. You and every level of yourself are composed of energy, as is everything around you. Energy reacts to thought and emotion. That is why, by rising to your higher self, specifically the astral level, you can affect and control energy, i.e., work magic. This is also why energy affects you, and why cleansing and releasing is so important. There are other ways in which you can be affected by energy, besides holding excess energy after psychic and magical work. The energy of certain times and places has an effect on people, as does the energy of certain objects, such as gemstones to use a well-known example. By aligning with these energies and working with them, You can increase and improve your own energy, and thus your psychic and magical abilities and their results in your everyday life. In Lesson 3, you will learn more about how these energies affect you and how you can best take advantage of them to aid in your personal spiritual growth. This October, the world of pagan voices comes together in one global gathering, the Pagan World Congress. 5 days, over 100 hours, speakers, rituals, music, and town halls streamed across the world. Join the conversation, shape the future, be part of history. The Pagan World Congress, October 9th through 13th, 2025. Online at paganworld.co.